know?
Come on, I just talking
You wanna know? You wanna know?
I'm just asking.
You wanna know? You wanna know? You wanna know? You wanna know?
Stop.
You wanna know?
You
You wanna
have
know?
to stop.
You wanna know?
Please stop.
I can't let you get close.
Can you hear my?
Welcome to Silly Whales. This is a mental health podcast. Hi, Joe.
Yo!
Yeah, see, I'm introduced Joe a lot earlier. We discuss things that are a little bit on the touchy side, and this show is for everyone, but it might not be for you for that very reason. We have two segments. We do mental health this week, and we do the journal. We're going to kick things off with mental health this week. Yeah, mental health this week, and we're going to be kicked off with Joe because he knows a lot more about this than me.
Sorry, I'm just reeling from the transition. Just want to touch on a subject which may become more relevant as technology becomes more relevant, and also opening up a discussion for people around the subject of neurodevelopmental disorders or neurodivergence in general. So there was a study that came out from the Mount Sinai Hospital, a seminal study, which was effectively that had found that on a particular non-coding gene, also called a pseudogene, though that's not necessary, called RNU2-2, as being pretty responsible for, as it puts it, relatively common NDDs, neurodevelopmental disorders. Neurodevelopmental disorders includes ADHD and autism and other sorts of things, but those are obviously the big ones that we know and love. And I wanted to bring this up both because whenever this stuff comes up, I'm always interested in it personally. It's also it's also a particular thing that we don't know very much about. Like, we have an understanding that there is a genetic basis for this stuff. We know that there is like a hereditary basis for like ADHD and autism, but we are largely pretty unsure about it. You know, the reason why over time ADHD and autism have become more umbrella terms rather than being super duper specific is because of the fact that we don't have like an immediate clear basis to like test someone in the way that you might test for like, you know, something like cancer or something like a pathogen or some other genetic disorder, which is like very clear, like, yes, we can do this and find out that, yes, you have X or Y. And so there's an immediate positive that I like on the subject, which is being able to, I suppose, like evidence the fact that it exists, being able to evidence that, and also being able to say like, yes, you know, we could do it. It's in like kind of an easy way to maybe not like label. I think the one issue that we could almost go into here is about like labeling, like not so much to just like label you or funnel you down into a series of ideas about yourself, but maybe, for example, to have kind of a, hey, parents, you know, or carers of any kind, you know, these are the kinds of things that could be that you may have to like kind of look towards or consider as your child is growing up, because we did a test and we've found that this particular thing exists. You know, like especially I'll go over to you for this, but I think that there's like that as technology goes forward, we're going to kind of become more aware of the building blocks of us, and so there eventually will be a point, I think at least, where we might be able to predict, and again, it's prediction, it's not certainty, but to predict, like from, you know, from a baby being born, and perhaps prior to a baby being born, like aspects of their, you know, of their genetics that may, if we see that they are very, very common in producing one thing or another, as being like, oh yeah, so this, you know, this is something that we can predict, so this is something we can give to you as parents to like understand about your child, even if it's something as simple as just like, you know, short-sightedness or something. I say as simple as, but you get what I mean. Like something as relatively benign for a human being as like short-sightedness, even though obviously you do need to do something about it. It's not like we have the technology to do so. So
but
I just
these
want
things exist already, though. Like, because in terms of like, you're able to. There are things that can indicate when you're pregnant if your child will have something like Down syndrome, for example, but
yes,
not in the way that is being discussed here. It creates, I guess, a rounded approach to how we can help parents, help young people, well, help anyone really. It's a landmark discovery, as they'll probably like to call it. But as you said, as technology gets better, this will become common practice.
yeah. The thing with Down syndrome, by the way, is that you literally have like an extra chromosome compared to everyone else. So like you have the extra chromosome of, I think, chromosome 21. So you end up having 3 pairs, like not 3 pairs, sorry, you have 3 chromosomes rather than a pair. So that's why like certain, and you know, like sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, the reason why, I think even Huntington's disease, the reason why those things are like so immediate, like it, and can be looked at, is that it's very clear what causes it, and we have like an understanding of the exact like gene and nucleotide bases involved in DNA that will then cause that thing, because it's very like physical. Like in the thing, you know, sickle cell anemia is about the structure of blood, and so the structure of blood gets messed up if a certain protein makes a certain set of things, you know, in a different shape, basically, which causes it to have a different shape, that sickle shape. So it's much more complicated when it comes to neurodevelopmental disorders, in part because like anything to do with the brain is way more complicated. And this describes monogenic, as in like a single gene, specifically like 2 small sites on like a very specific area, which is not even a coding gene. Like it's a pseudo gene. I won't go into it. But the point is that as a result, it's very complicated and difficult. So over time, then that's why it's been so difficult. And I'm only interested in this from a like kind of maybe like like in a conversation space of like just what the science says. But then the other thing is like, how do people feel about the kind about like stuff like this, like neurodivergence and neurodevelopmental disorders in general, as being something we can actually point to, as opposed to this system which we have now, where we have to diagnose using largely like symptom concepts. Like, you know, it is, there are cases where it's much more clear, you know, like there are many people who are autistic who are like much more heavily autistic in severity. So like we would do that. It would be easier to diagnose them. Whereas like for me, obviously it took me until I was like 23 before a diagnosis came my way. And I think that there's an interesting thing that I was trying to discuss before we started, which was like, you know, it's entirely possible that like smaller, that like kind of the umbrella terms we know might begin to not disappear as such, but begin to lose as much of their effect. You know, we might start having words that specifically describe like these particular neurodevelopmental disorders, because we begin to find the actual like genetic basis for it. There is like a whole topic here, like a much wider topic.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And more difficult. And I don't know if we can have this conversation because, well, you know, time, but also just like, I don't think like we sit on a particular angle of this that has like a super big problem with like being able to identify this stuff in the genes. But I find that I know that some people are already in the camp of not even liking the concept of me using the term neurodevelopmental disorder. Like the disorder bit is something that people are going to be bothered by, let alone kind of the medicalized perspective of it, you know, that like, oh, now we don't have this RNU2 or RNU2-2 or RNU4-2 thing. So like, you know, does that mean that we're now not autistic or whatever? You know, as we're like as we begin to learn what actually makes this happen, like, you know, the genetic basis as well as the environmental, it's entirely possible, by the way, the phenotype or the actual outcome of genetics and environment. It's entirely possible that, a person could have many mutations that set them up to struggle in various ways that we would associate with like ADHD or autism, but just because of various environmental factors end up finding a path on their own that really means that a diagnosis is completely useless and pointless for them, or they don't really need help in that way. I think there's an interesting discussion also there about like, I think most people's when we talk generally about diagnosis and things, we're talking about having access to certain things. With ADHD, it might be, for example, access to some sort of medicine to help, right? But like, if you're someone who has for whatever reason been brought up and supported in a certain way that just ends up meaning they really don't have to worry about it, then what does it matter, right? It's kind of like, the diagnosis almost matters only as much as it bothers the person who is dealing with it. It's a very similar concept. We can talk about lots of different things in this way, including like gender dysphoria and other topics. And the point is that like that has all come out of the fact that we don't have direct, clear ways to identify a predictive potential for these like divergences, if you will.
We're reaching a point where like we now might have to get people who are like expertise on this to actually come onto the show. We're reaching that point now.
Yeah,
if we could get any of these people who work on this, but also have contributed to it, either they've written a thesis on it or they understand it to a point which, pretty much if they're an expert on this, it'll be interesting to see if, one, they could explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because biology isn't a strong suit, which I think is a trait that a lot of people share as well, but also to fully comprehend the steps that we could be taking as a society next, well, I would love to say next 100 years, but it could be earlier. It could be next 10, 20 years even.
Mm-hmm. Or anyone, honestly, who has had any sort of contribution towards the debates and discussions around like designer babies and the philosophies around that, because that's a lot of that, and like disability within that framing, because a lot of this discussion kind of comes back to a lot of those issues and questions and answers and how we relate to all of these things culturally and so on. And fuck fascism, and fuck all of that stuff, obviously. But that's the problem with like how people like to address and use these kind of things to make sweeping statements about a society that are just not true. So yeah, it's a really interesting like area that probably we did have like some years ago, and I think we will see that conversation come up again in much greater use, possibly within 10 years from now. We'll start seeing like that conversation come up again as we genuinely develop and start to, genome stuff. As soon as that becomes like, as soon as we can significantly sequence that kind of thing, and we can really start to predict like what a gene does, or even this is not a coding gene, which means it doesn't produce proteins. It just plays a role in regulation. Again, I can't explain it all. But at the same time, that means that it's not necessarily something that you can easily experimentally find. So there's a lot of work to be done effectively. And again, how much do people feel that this matters, or how much do people think that, or is it just that we need to say these things just so that we at least have we can have a reasonable discussion about it, or do we just need to focus on making society better for the people who have these divergences, disorders, however you want to think of it.
Yeah. On to the next.
Yeah, go.
Boom. Oh, by the way, if you are wondering where you can find all this stuff, it's in the description of the episode. All the links are there, and then you click on the link, especially for Science Daily stuff. It'll give you all of the references that's been cited as well. So if you want to go even deeper, you can.
Yeah.
Now for the next one.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was going to say there's a Science Daily one, and then there's the actual like article. But the actual article is very difficult to pass through. Like it's so Science Daily one will do, I think.
Yeah. On to the next one. The hit show Adolescence. I haven't seen it yet.
No, same. We talked
but,
about it.
yeah, we've discussed it. I've been told to watch it, but but that has sparked another conversation about the use of social media and young people accessing social media. And it has brought about, this article comes from The Guardian, and it has brought about the idea that young people should then be banned from using social media until they hit a certain age. This isn't in the article from The Guardian, but the idea of young people being banned is, but the age that they should be banned at has always been changing from 16 to 18. It is another debate that is swelling up, and I don't see us reaching a conclusion on it yet. However, Australia has in the last few years, and I believe later on this year they'll be enacting their version of a social media ban. But like most things to do with banning something, it is quite easy to, circumvent said ban. We're here again. We're here again. And we find ourselves looking to ban things and looking to create laws to stop things from happening, rather than looking to educate people on the things that they are accessing. Same thing when it comes to financial literacy as well. Rather than trying to educate young people on financial literacy and getting them prepared for adulthood and every single aspect of adulthood, especially the financial aspect of it, we look to remove that from them. And then we ask questions like, why are they not good with money? Well, you set us up for that, Like the idea of taxes and learning about taxes, there's a reason why there's a struggle and why young people don't understand what those things mean. We don't teach it well. And in some cases, we don't teach it at all. Same with social media. If you don't teach the effects of social media, then you will end up suffering from consequences of using social media, be it using it too much, be it you being a victim of abuse, be it you abusing somebody else on social media. If you don't understand the pratfalls of it, if you don't understand what it's there to do, then you will have cases which have been referenced in this article, such as guy around our age, 26 years old. In England, he murdered his ex-girlfriend along with her sister and her mother because, and it's been linked to him watching lots of videos of Andrew Tate. Radicalization is real. We need to learn how to really curb the effects of radicalization of everybody, because we're talking political radicalization, religious radicalization. It is a fear that is very valid, but how we deal with it isn't through banning everything. It's through education on the truth about these things. So we will have cases, and even, again, referencing this article, 12-year-old girl stabbed her friend in a tribute to Slender Man. Again, everyone's first thing is to clutch their pearls and say, ban Slender Man. Once again, this is what happens when you don't educate people on the effects of these things. Now, a lot of these cases probably would have happened in one way or another without social media existing, as some of it just comes across as being pretty much unhinged anyway. But our reluctance to educate, but our proactivity to ban and legislate really, really, really scares the overall shit out of me, because we're looking at America and we're looking at the fact that the campaign of the Republicans was, we are the free speech party. Everything that they have done has been anti-free speech. We've had people be denied visas to come into the United States because of the things they've tweeted. We've had people silenced. We've had people be threatened, both mentally, physically, financially. We cannot go down the route of the United States here. We have to educate people. And we have to educate people and understand that people have the agency to also make bad decisions. If people abuse a social media platform and it is against the law, punish them to the full extent of the law. But creating a new law to ban people who already use this stuff is only going to create young people who are even better than the people making the laws to circumvent it. VPNs exist. if you don't want to pay full price for something, see if you can get it cheaper in a different country virtually. Like, it's ridiculous. But anyway, I'll pass it on to you, Joe.
Yeah, we actually discussed this, and I was sort of lamenting like that we do need to have this conversation, and I do watch like, you know, the young children in sort of near care around me, and I think about more again, and I think this is very similar to how I relate to YouTube addiction, where it's, you know, which is a social media, in that I think it's, while I can say that there is a net negative, I think the reality is that the biggest thing is that it preys upon the weaknesses of individuals, right? Like, if that makes sense, like it's what people are bad at that it's very good at exploiting. So even in children, for example, you'll get very, very different outcomes across children about like how much it affects them, or you know, what extent does their life does their feeling of like self-confidence or how their life goes, like, you know, whether it's like their friendship circles at school or whatever relies upon social media. It will be different from child to child, but, you know, being like an escape, which we'll talk about later, or it being a, you know, or the way in which the way in which it could be used as social manipulation, or the way that people relate to each other being disturbingly different rather than just being different, right? Is entirely, you know, I know people who I think can and have largely go through their, you know, have and can go through their lives being perfectly fine with a healthy use of this kind of thing, and having done so from a young age, you know. And I think that if the attempt is to just remove it, there is a kind of misunderstanding of the problem just as much as there is a, you know, it's kind of like, we shouldn't ban phones because scammers exist, or ban email because scammers exist, right? There should be a we should realize that, like, you know, just because people can find ways of hurting themselves is the wrong description, but like being hurt by using something, right? And not realizing the pain or suffering they're causing themselves, or the financial problems or whatever. And in reality, like, you know, I when I think about things like people like Andrew Tate and stuff like that gets into a space where I'm like, yeah, that there's clearly like an online space that exists for a lot of young men who are completely like losing touch with reality by engaging with it, you know, like, and it's not really their fault that that's what's happening. And so I can feel the desire in me to want to just squash it out. And then you start getting into the whole free speech bollocks that people tried to pull on that. But the point is that I just think it's, I very much like, regardless of like whether it works or not, because I agree with you that I think that there are like lots of shortcomings with just banning in the way that, you know, we have seen across all of time. I really do feel sympathetic, like I do. But it's like, you know, the genie's been let out of the bottle, right? Or like, you know, a Pandora's box has been opened, and we can never like put it back in. We can never close that and just have it all stay in there. It's a thing now, and, you know, it will exist in a form like 4chan if it doesn't exist in a way like Twitter. You know, X, fucking X. You know, so at the end of the day, like, at the end of the day, I totally see it, and I think that genuinely, yeah, we have to make it a core part of the way that we integrate or engage with learning. And to be fair, they probably should have done just as much anyway, you know, as we were growing up, in terms of just talking about like how to approach literature or newspapers or whatever, you know, like, or how to. I mean, we did have a little bit of it, but mostly with things like Wikipedia or something, you know, but
Yeah,
honestly,
like,
quite lazily.
The idea is always never trust Wikipedia. You can never trust Wikipedia. Oh my God, don't ever trust Wikipedia. Shut the fuck up, man. Like, come on. Really? Like,
Wikipedia's not bad.
like Wikipedia is, like, one, Wikipedia is very, very, very rarely wrong. Two, I don't think the diligency of the people who moderate Wikipedia is respected enough. 3, the idea that the sources that we should have got is from newspapers instead, other than Wikipedia, really, really, really irked me, because we now are in a state where, well, back then we knew it, and now we know it. We can't trust anyone who writes for a main newspaper in this country. Like, we can source articles, but we cannot guarantee that what is being written in the newspaper is correct, which is why they have to source their own sources. They have to provide facts. They have to actually provide evidence for what they're suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, the main thing is that Keir Starmer intends to, and I quote, kickstart the education by screening adolescents in secondary schools nationwide. Now, I haven't seen the show. If it's that impactful, then sure, by all means, go for it. But once again, Australia is, and later on this year, will complete their ban on social media for anyone under the age of 16. The creative adolescents also would like that ban to be in place here. And I would like to warn pretty much everybody that it is stupid to do that. It is stupid to do that because it is super easy to circumvent that. And once again, it's patronizing young people, telling them that they can't be trusted with technology that they've been using technically their whole lives. It's not going to work. It's not. Like, in the same way that, well, anything you don't want kids to do, they're probably going to do.
Right.
And it's up to you to educate them on that.
Yeah, it's way, way, way more. It's way more efficient and effective to talk to them about it, and also to do so accurately. Like, I think the biggest problem that comes up with some we're talking about things like drugs and stuff like that as well when we're having this discussion about like education for young people, right? In these sort of like, looking ahead to your future kind of education, your sort of PHSE. I do think that there is sometimes extreme. There's a very extreme like let's not engage with this as it is. Let's very much like let's put a message, like essentially propaganda. I don't use that in a bad way necessarily.
If you smoke weed, you will die, and you will never be able to look yourself in the face again, and your family will disown you. And if you have, to be honest, the sex education stuff actually makes a lot of sense. So that should be a very clear message. But even then, like the idea of, because very different methods of teaching sex education. So when we were taught it, it's actually done fairly well. But I got it taught at 3 different schools. One of the schools I got taught, it was a very, I got the teacher's opinions on it.
Mm-hmm.
So she was like, she said, oh, well, there's no point in having sex at all, like anyway, until like you're 18 or 20, and make sure that you are like not doing anything disgusting and don't copy what you do in porn, which is very good advice. But it was on a bit of a tangent because the whole point was we just need to know about, what sex actually is, because we're fucking like 14 years old, and like what not to do. And what we got was her saying, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's a joke that we used to bring up quite a few times. Pretty much, don't ever do anything like bondage related. And don't ever, like something along the lines like don't get ropes out or anything like that. We wouldn't have had any access to that stuff anyway. So of course the first thing that we all wanted to do now is, what the fuck are ropes? So it's like things like that, there's ways to educate this stuff.
The adults have to come at it from a like, we have to educate ourselves, and we have to be open to the fact that even if we have some issue with it ourselves, we can't say that the children do. And so we have to look at it from the fact that, well, if the child wants to do something, that's on them. Like, if there's a young person who wants to do something, we need to be able to arm them to understand the thing that they're thinking that they'll do. or at least like, like make sure they are not in being like in looking at us and thinking like in being disillusioned from our discussion about it aren't then illusioned by some other version of what's going on.
The term informed consent comes into mind, and just the
Mm.
idea of we've given you all the information, it's up to you from here on out. We'll help you if something goes wrong, but we've given you all the information. Like case in point, and we'll end on this. Russia, as I knew this already, but it's also in the article there, banned Instagram and Facebook. I have friends who live in Russia who are talking to me on Instagram right now. Guess what?
Right.
VPNs exist. So, you can't really close it either, because that means you literally have to get access to, businesses, and they have to get access to people's computers as well. Good luck with that one. So yeah, don't ban social media for kids under the age of 16. It is stupid, and you'll just be giving businesses lots of money. I already pay money to NordVPN. I pay 80-something pounds a year. Everyone on this road where I live will probably end up paying that. So it's super easy. Anyway, anything else you want to add to that?
Nah, you're good, man.
Cool. And now it's time for the journal. Yeah, time for the journal. We discuss our lives and all that stuff. If you want to check out, that's totally fine. Kick the ball to Joe.
So I said I would talk about escapism at some point, so I'm gonna. And I'm still kind of lost in the reality in the discussion topic of this, because I am, even just in my recommended that I'm going to do later, I'm going to make it, seem to contradict myself. But relating to what I spoke about before, where I mentioned the like use of social media as, for example, as like a way of preying upon like people. I think that escapist things like media in general is very and I'm being vague about that, because I don't want to really say, because I think there's certain media that probably doesn't quite fit in it, but I don't really want to say that innately. Like, I almost think news media can be a weird form of escapism for some people if we describe like, news media that is incredibly fictional, right? Like, news media that's bullshit and is telling people lies, right? As versus news media about actual events that are happening and so on. I don't mean in like a taking the, in a parody sort of way, but in like a, they genuinely are just spewing crap. And how, it can almost be reality TV like in the way that they represent like these topics and things like that and lead people down a dark path and thinking that reality is one way or another. I think I talked last week about my kind of recognition about how idealistic I am and how much I think in the abstract or engage with the abstract. And I don't feel that that's a negative in and of itself. I just think that it makes it very easy for me to be pulled in towards really high concept stuff versus, pretentious shit, versus like being relatively grounded and engaging with like even simple things, which when I was over the course of my life, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, dealing with, not being able to understand social stuff and trying to work it out. And, I went to, YouTube as a way of like both figuring stuff out while also escaping the world. And so, I owe a lot of good things, an extremely high number of good things, as well as a lot of bad things to social media, and due to escapist media. And I guess the real point is that I think that there is a seemingly like a ratio of escapist media or escapism in general that is not only comfortable but healthy, right? Because we can't live in a world in which I suppose you could, but I think that there are issues with being in a world in which you don't engage with a little bit of imagination. And I think it's difficult enough because we need to find a way to to be able to I forget what the word is, but like, you know, compartmentalize or be able to, you know, take the stresses that we feel and find ways to kind of escape them elsewhere, or like to redirect the energy. And escapism, or like media in general, are incredibly important and valuable ways to impart information, concepts, ideas, you know. Like, I watch D&D content, and one of the reasons I love it so much is because of the exploration of philosophy, of like idea and or like ideas about, you know, even like mental health related concepts, like, you know, anxiety and identity and other sorts of things like that, which I never would have gotten outside of that. Like, it just wouldn't be possible for me. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I wouldn't have engaged, or I wouldn't have found ways to engage with that probably if I had not engaged with this sort of media and this sort of.
So are you saying that you feel like the way it's presented makes it easier for you to access?
Let me put it. The way it's presented makes it easier to access. Yes, but I think it's also the quality of what I'm looking at. Like, so the thing I'll ask you actually as a question of this, because I think this is important to what I'm trying to say. Would you say that there are significant differences in quality between different forms of media?
Quality of what, though?
Quality of experience. I'm being vague for a specific reason, Ness, but
yeah, like it's a loaded question, because like there could be a shit version of something and a good version of something. Like, you know, if I watch a video by the Critical Drinker, who for context is like a right wing cunty guy who calls everything woke and all that stuff, that's a shit experience for me. But it also offers no insight as well.
Right.
But if I were to watch, say, I don't know, Pillar of Garbage, who's a fairly smaller YouTuber, then there'll be insight to it. Like they did a really good video on like Studio Ghibli and the idea of AI art being used to create Studio Ghibli-esque images, and how like that kind of goes against Studio Ghibli. Things like that. Cool, there's an insight to it. You know, you learn a lot, you get a political understanding through a different context, things like that. So yes and no.
Well, to me, it sounds like you have just described it as a yes, but maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Because I think it's a very individualistic thing. So other people might view Critical Drinker as being really insightful, and they might find different things that they can like, different topics that they feel like were represented really well and presented in a really good manner. They might feel that politics was presented in a really good manner by his videos because they are anti-woke. Oh, look at me. Ooh, I'm a cunt. Like, so that's why I say it's very individualistic.
Yeah, I suppose I'm asking you because I'm asking for your specific opinion from your perspective, effectively. So
and then the answer is yes.
Yeah, so like, you know, I do think, because ultimately, yes, we recognize that, like, even though there might be some sort of like objective measure, we are not necessarily going to be able to believe in ourselves that we definitely have the objective measure, right? I obviously can't be sure that the things I'm watching are the best quality things possible to watch. You know, like, that's just a ridiculous thing. And there are things I've seen that I think are incredible that other people watch and they go, yeah, that's fine. Right. It just doesn't hit for them the way it hits for me, and other sorts of things like that. But I think, you know, within a range of things, that some things are of a higher quality, right? The some of the stuff, like, I've recommended Dropout a bunch of times, and I will technically recommend them today, because when I watch like Brendan Lee Mulligan DMing dungeon mastering for, you know, Dimension 20 and doing D&D, I find not just him, but him and the players' insights and the expression of that through a medium that allows for like that kind of conversation and interaction and themes to be put forward, and allows me to have like a better understanding of both, like, in so many different kind of topics and things, and with there being like lots of characters who are all played by different people. each of them being able to give their own insight into how they feel, and also then interacting with each other over the course of like a narrative. Like, you know, to me, that there is so much in there, and I think that they have a lot of good ideas and engage with good things, like engage with good analysis in real life. That means that when they're creating, you know, the experience, I think I am watching something by the end of it. I think I'm watching something that is high quality. You know, I do see that. And so it's very difficult for me to even, you know, from a YouTube addiction standpoint, for example, I find it so, it's one of the things that easily gets me back into YouTube addiction, just because I think of how good that thing is, you know, like, and there are going to be things like that that exist that I want to engage in, or that I think is good for me. But I still recognize that maybe I need to engage with these things, but I can't engage with them to the extent that I have been, you know, that I do need to take it down a notch, that I need to, you know, like I was saying before, attach myself to kind of more grounded material values that I genuinely am impressed by. And again, there's a necessary back and forth. You can't just do one, because I think, like, how do you determine the value of anything if you don't have like ways of engaging with other people and talking about things? I mean, we use metaphors and analogies all the time to talk about philosophical concepts. It's just something we do all the time. We need to do that. There needs to be like that kind of separation, or like going into like esoteric or abstract versus like, you know, like you need to just do this thing. But recently, with me having to do all of the like, all, you know, to do with, doing lots of stuff related to being a best man and going to a wedding, has actually imparted in me has been actually quite enjoyable, even though it's been stressful, because I've been having to do actual things, and I've been having to think about like actual stuff that's happening rather than just escaping away. And it's actually been good for me recently, with help, I should add, from you, you know, towards like doing that. Like, now, having gotten over the hump of not engaging in it initially, it's been really nice to do that. It's been really nice to finish that off and get through that and continue to do that. I'm always start coming up with ideas on my own. And that's what I mean. Like, the escapism is something that I think so many people engage in now, across lots of different kinds of media, TV, radio, whatever, across so much. And we all do it so much, and we recognize that. We know that we do. It's not like we're not, you know, everyone is aware of it. And I guess that there is a question is, at what point do we reach where that does become too much? And I think majority of people probably do engage with it too much. But again, for every person, there is an amount, and then also there is an amount that certain kinds of things affect us worse off than others. And so I merely wish for people to consider what they engage in, consider the media they engage in. Because again, you should not feel bad for enjoying something. I enjoy things, and I do still think that some things are better to enjoy than others, or like certain things I enjoy are much more useful, or that I can gain more from, or relate more to reality, or have something to say, versus other things that I would consider, I mean, to be honest, trash, right? I do think that exists for me. You know, something that's a bit more mindless and just fun versus something that is, and then there's trash underneath that, below that level even. And then things like that I think are, you know, quite poignant and important. But I can't only do the poignant stuff, and I can't always do the fun stuff. Like, I need that. And I also need, again, to be grounded in reality. I need some fundamental thing in my life, and I can't just only rely on, you know, these escapisms. And that's it. Like, I don't have enough to say. Like, I've thought about this, and I've got my opinions come back a bit. I used to be a lot more like spiky about this opinion, where I was like, escapism's bad, but I realize how stupid that is. Like, the more I engage with things, I realize how ridiculous that is. But you know, that's me like reacting to what feels like an exploitation of my own mind because of the way that my addiction exists. So it makes me feel like I'm being taken advantage of, and whatever, and it makes me feel like all of this is bad and needs to all be gone. And I realize that's not true, and I realize I need to appreciate the best and the highest quality of those things versus the least, and to specifically self-analyze and become and recognize that there are things I should care about more and there are things I should care about less, and that also goes for escapists like media and escapist ideas and concepts and so on. Not so scathing as I think it might have been if you asked me about this 2 weeks ago, but this is just I'm going through a somewhat of a metamorphosis on in part of this, but it has required like the thing that has got me there is these grounded values and like help from others, support from others, engaging with the issue, which might be even more of a thing. Like if things are going wrong, engage with the issue. Don't use escapism just to deal with it. Like if you're dealing with the issue, then escapism's fine. Use it sometimes. You need to just to get by. That's fine.
Yeah. Like I think earlier on today, I was thinking, hey, we need to really push on with the Happiness Project. It's a thing I really want to do this year. Mm. If I don't get this done this year, I'll feel like shit. So that's my main thing. I have them all written down, most of them. I feel like I want to add a couple to it or take some out of it. I think I need to, pretty much the minute I get my next paycheck, I might just go into a recording studio, re-record a lot of them, and then put them up on Spotify ASAP. So I think I have an artist who's willing to do the covers for some of them, and that'll be good. Make friends with artists. That's my main thing that I'll say to everybody. Like, I'm not going to hit you guys with escapism. Make friends with people who can do cool shit. Okay? Yeah. That's it. That's it. That's my journal. Nothing major. So, it is now time for choo-choo! Recommendation station. Joe.
Pulling into the Junk Mother Supercut station. The Junk Mother Supercut, that's what it's called on YouTube. So I was saying I was going to recommend Dropout again. The price now annually is $69.99. It's gone up from $59.99. Doesn't actually affect me because I was already a subscriber. My subscription's frozen, so it won't go up. But if you're going to join, which is like less than £6 a month, and there's loads of good stuff on it, including the D&D stuff that I really enjoy. I actually really would like for them to do I'd really like whether it be like a YouTube series perhaps on like, or I guess they can't because a lot of it is on their platform, but like maybe even on their platform, if there is a way to somehow distill like the story beats of a D&D show, like almost like super cutting it down to like remove a lot of like the mechanical stuff, which a lot of people might not enjoy as much. Like, and the thing that, when you go to someone and say, oh, watch this. And they're like, oh, this is 14 hours long, what you've given me, or 28 hours long or something. And it's like, or 20 hours long at least. And it's like, yep, it's great. Honestly, trust me. And like a lot, and part of it is just lots of maths, and playing a game like aspect of it. And then there's the rest of like the story stuff. And yet the story stuff is the thing I like the most. So I mean, it's a bit of work, and I don't know if it's really necessary and all of that. But like, in order to get like lots more people, because although to be fair, they're doing well for themselves. They played at Madison Square Garden's Dimension 20 recently, within like the last month or two. So as just a weird example, because it's a very weird example, and I realize that there's too much context I probably have to give to it, but I'm not going to give to it. The Junk Mother Supercut, the YouTube channel is Mushroom Poet. That's the ones who supercut it. What can I say? Emily Axford, the woman, is playing an android. The Zach Oyama, the guy, is playing a guy with a brain slug. Like if you think of like Futurama, like a brain slug. so that's weird. And it's in like a sci-fi, very, very much like sci-fi setting. And then Brennan Lee Mulligan is playing this very interesting character. And there's just some interesting dialogue. I think it's like it can exist enough in itself. You don't need too much context, which is why I chose it. And I think there's little bits of it that I really like in terms of thinking about self-confidence and self-identity and so on that I thought was quite nice. So if you just want like something a little bit bizarre, just watch it. It's like 25 minutes long. And it's got some fun, wacky stuff as well. Just kind of like a little bit throughout it.
We've got to get a button set up for you whenever you talk about either D20 or anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons.
Ooh, that one's a bit harsher than my Within Reason. But
I think you're shill for D20. My recommendation is RoboCop Rogue City. It is free right now on PlayStation Plus. Pretty much, it is RoboCop, which means you pick up a gun, you shoot people, and you talk in a really robotic voice. It is just action. It was like very, very... You can call it mindless, but I think there's actually a bit of depth to the character of RoboCop. So, hey, do what you will with it. It's free. You might be able to even get it free on Game Pass or whatever. Go out there, have fun, do whatever the fuck it is you want to do with it. Like, it is what it is. Like, it's a game. I'm not going to hit you with anything too crazy. I rarely ever do here. And that is the end of the show. Jesus, we did it. Inshallah. Hopefully, by the time this episode gets uploaded, Arsenal will be through to the semi-finals of... The semi-finals? The semi-finals of the... Where are we? Is it the round of 16? Well, like Arsenal... So I'm having a panic attack here. We'll be through the semi-finals of the Champions League, and then next Wednesday I'll be able to tell you guys, hey, we did it. We're going to win the Champions League. We're winning 3-0, and we have to face Real Madrid at the Santiago Bernabeu. So, yeah, it'll be a thing. Anyway, we're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We and Mikel Arteta and Manuel Almunia are in the win. See ya.
All I can think about is how Cristiano Ronaldo is in a fighting game now.